This week on DeadPhilSunday, we're taking a look at the looted artifacts from Abyssinia, now known as Ethiopia, that are held here in London. The Guardian explains that the Victoria and Albert Museum is currently in talks with the Ethiopian embassy about returning these treasures. End quote. Tim Reeve tells The Guardian that there is no dispute about whether or not they were borrowed. They were looted. End quote. This return and a more open talk about the origin of artifacts is an attempt to decolonize the museum and art world. It also raises questions about what it means to colonize and how we can go about a procedure to repair the injustices of the past. This week, then, we'll be looking at how we can define colonialism and what it does to the mind and spirit, and also highlight how healing wounds of colonialism might take a reconstruction of a lost, perhaps even looted identity. For this, we will be looking at the Negritude movement, specifically Aimé Césaire. In Discourse on Colonialism, Césaire speaks of colonialism as an oppressive set of relations. He says, "Between colonizer and colonized, there is room only for forced labor, intimidation, pressure, the police, taxation, theft, rape, compulsory crops, contempt, mistrust, arrogance, self-complacency, swishness, brainless elites, degraded mass." End quote. From this, we can highlight the dangers, the pain that colonialism imposes, how it is the thieving of people's identities. Césaire goes even so far as to say colonialism is equal to thingification. Here we have the answer to the first question we asked. What is colonization? According to Césaire, colonialism is the stripping of humanity from a group. It is the imposition of an unequal state of relations that leaves space only for domination. He refutes the claim that colonialism put different civilizations in contact, a claim that is defended by many who continue to express disdain from the fall of empires. Césaire claims that for civilization to be in contact with one another, they would have to be on an equal footing. They would have to both be people, human. But instead, what we have is civilized European and thingified non-European. The non-Western peoples were no longer people, just things. But Césaire doesn't leave it just at that. Colonialism isn't just the destruction of what was, but also of what could be. He speaks of stolen hope and future. He writes, "I am talking about societies drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, land confiscated, religions smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibilities wiped out." End quote. Colonialism marks the destruction of a possible fruition. If creativity and possibility are fertility, colonialism is infertility or death. Man has the power to create, but colonialism is the distinct proof that creation can also be destructed. Colonialism is then the looting of history, the looting of a future. It is a thieving of humanity that can sometimes have a material existence, like the Ethiopian artifacts in London, but often also concerns brothers and sisters separated by the slave trade, or an inability to trace back one's personal history of identity. It is the loss of a language and the loss of religion. This loss of identity is difficult to live with. It causes pain to not know. It is out of this pain that the Negritude movement emerges. As a way to build an identity outside of these factors that can and have been stolen. A building of identity that can fit any member of the descendants of enslaved Africans during the slave trade, regardless of who was the colonizer. Césaire says that the Negritude movement was the first movement when a black voice emerged saying "I, N-word," end quote. In this Hegelian-like quote, we see the forming of the black identity, a common identity for those who had their past and history erased and their future changed because of their thingification by the Western Europeans. This common voice brings us to the final question of how to rebuild, how to retrieve what was stolen. Earlier, it was mentioned that language and religion had been lost in the process of colonialism. What was not mentioned was what was created. Bell Hooks and others speak of existing in a margin. They speak of having to use the oppressor's language to express the injustice of that very oppression. They speak about the difficulty of existing in a world not meant for them. But Hooks also highlights the radical possibilities of the margin, end quote. How the margin is also a place of creation. Creation, like for instance the birth of the Creole language, or of hybrid religions that combine what was left of African pre-European religions and mythology with imposed Christianity. These are all examples of the creation that occurs, the creation that must remain alive in order to, as Bell Hooks write, recover ourselves, to reconcile, to renew. Echoing the end of Césaire's I N-word speech, a voice of freedom, and first and foremost, a voice for the retrieved identity. Césaire highlights the importance of the Black Renaissance to the work that he and his colleagues have done towards a retrieval of an identity with the Negritude movement. Both Negritude and Black Renaissance were formed by poets and artists. Both of these movements were about creativity and remembrance. It seems that for Césaire, and for many more, the way towards a healing of colonial wounds is through exploring creativity and uniting in a common identity of stolen history. So, colonialism and what was looted will not be forgotten, and instead will fuel the creation of new art and identities. And when the stolen material objects can be returned, like in the case of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London to Ethiopia, perhaps doing so will ease the scars of the past a little quicker. This marks the end of the 5th episode of our DeadPhilSundays series. We hope you enjoyed it and that we'll see you next week.